This is a recording of an oral history interview with Carey A. Fowler Jr., 1001 Starkey Road, lot number 329, Largo, Florida, Thursday, February the 16th, 1989, and Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center, Lansing, Michigan. Location was Mr. Fowler's home in Largo. Phone number 813-530-5052. Tape 1 of 1 tape. You were in the engine plant, weren't you?
That's where I ended up. Yeah. That's where I retired from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Carey, why don't we kind of go back through your history of what decided you to come to Oldsmobile? What year did you hire in? What did you do? Who did you work for?
Boy, you're going back a long way.
Kind of bring us up to date on how things were different then than they are now.
Well, it's you go way back, and I think 55 years ago is when I hired in here. In 1934, January 31st, 1934, was the first night I worked. It was in a midnight shift. Well, and I hired into Oldsmobile because I needed a job to make more money, really. And that was during the Depression.
Yes. What were you doing?
I hired in the axle plant. I went to work in the axle plant on the machine line. And of course, I knew nothing about machines. And when I first went there, George Lafferty was a group leader at that time. They had one foreman on the midnight shift, but they had group leaders taking care of individual machine lines. George Lafferty was the group leader. He took me down to a small drill press. He drilled one large piece and one small piece in there. He says, now that's what you do. He says, you get your material from the man on your right and you give them to the man on your left. He says, you catch up with the man on your right and you stay ahead of the man on your left. And that was the training I received when I first hired in at Oldsmobile.
Well, what were these metal pieces?
Yeah, it's when Oldsmobile first started what they called knee action. It was on the 34 model, the knee action, which was individual springing on the front wheels. The coiled springs like we have now, which is a common occurrence in the car now.
Now, these pieces you were drilling holes in? Or
They were cotter pin holes. They used the upper and lower yoke to tie in the wishbone and the steering arms together, and they put a nut on the end of them, and then I was drilling the cotter pin hole. They put a cotter pin in to keep the nuts from coming off. And that was my job. And we worked on, it was the bonus system at that time. I got 46 cents an hour, and then if we made our standard and made over that, we got a bonus of so much money. And we got paid every 2 weeks.
Do you remember how much money you earned?
I think the first year I worked there, I made $746 or something like that. In the whole year.
Now, was that straight time, or did you have some overtime?
No, you paid no overtime. No overtime.
Oh, you mean you would work 8, 10, 12 hours?
No, you only worked 7.5 hours.
7.5.
No Saturdays or
and
Sundays.
no overtime.
No, of course, that was in the Depression.
Well, yes.
See,
yes.
we were lucky to have a job, really. And the first year I worked there, in fact, when I quit, they were making more cars in 1 week than they made the whole first year I worked there. You can believe that or not.
Oh, that's a good statement.
They made more cars in 1 week than they made the first year that I worked there.
And you retired, you told me, in 1974. That's quite something.
Yeah, it was in the axle plant.
How long did you stay in the axle plant? Now, what building was that?
That was in building 38. Building 38. And we worked in building 38 in 1934 and in 1935, and then they moved it to Building 20, where the old Fisher Body Plant used to be. That was on the west side of the plant. I don't know if you remember where the old Fisher Body Plant was.
Just vaguely.
Well, you know where the final assembly plant is now, the big one, not the
Yeah.
new one, was just this side of there,
I see.
right along. I can't think of the name of the street.
Is that Pine
I think it's not Pine Street.
Division?
Division Street.
Division.
Division Street.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's where they moved the axle plant.
And then you moved with that.
I moved with that, but then when I moved over there, I went into a different job. I was still on the machine line, but I was drilling and reaming steering arms then. And that's when I got married. That year, 1936.
1936.
I was working over there, 1936. Ruth and I got married in April of that year.
And you were drilling and reaming
Steering arms. And I worked for Amos Proctor. I don't know if you know Amos Proctor.
I've heard the name.
I worked for Amos Proctor.
What kind of a man was he to work with?
Very, very good. Very nice fellow. Very nice fellow.
And you still weren't getting any overtime.
No overtime.
Still,
Lucky to work straight time.
Was this
Yeah.
bonus system still in?
No, they took that away.
I see.
And I think I made 54 cents an hour then. Got up to 54 cents an hour. Something like that, anyway. But I didn't work on that line too long. I moved to different lines. In fact, I went practically all of the machine floors in the axle plant, and even worked on the assembly line.
What building was that in?
Building 20.
Building 20.
Yeah, I worked on the steering knuckle line. I worked on brake drums. I worked on the axle shaft line. I worked on the rear housing line. I worked on the front assembly line.
All was in the machinist area.
Yeah, it was all within the machine area, but I worked on all of the lines. In fact, got a lot of experience.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Where was the engine block line?
That was down in Building 28.
Oh, yes.
Down Building 28. Building 28 and Building 33. And now Building 33 was the old straight 8 line. And do you remember the straight 8 line?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was in Building 33. Building 28 was the 6-cylinder line.
Oh. Do you remember any problems that you encountered in your job of trying to machine different parts, or any labor problems?
Well, when I worked on in the axle shaft line, that's when the union was starting to come in fairly strong. And at that time, the axle shaft line went on a sit-down strike. And they sat down for one night, and then they called it off. But that's all it was. I can't remember the year, but I think it was in 37 or 38. 38, I think. 38.
Did that worry you that they were, you were a member of the union then?
No,
You
no,
never,
I wasn't.
never were. I see.
I didn't join the union till later on,
I see.
because they were making it kind of rough on fellas that didn't join the union.
Yes.
See?
When did how shall I say this? The edict go in that you had to be a member of the union?
Oh boy. I don't think that came in till after the war. If I remember it, I think it came in after the war.
After World War II?
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
see.
And I stayed in the axle plant then until 1940. Then I asked to be transferred over to the gun plant. That's when they started making 20mm guns for England. And I asked if I could go over there and work, and they transferred me over there.
Who was the superintendent over there?
Frank Hager Sr.
Yes.
Remember him?
I knew him a little.
Mm-hmm. And he was the general superintendent. I'm trying to think of the superintendent. It was a little fella. But Arnold Hanson was my general foreman. I went working for him. And that's when they first started the 20 millimeter gun, and I went to work on a internal grinder.
And what building was that?
Building 38. Building 38. Or 30, no, wait a minute, building 36.
Building 36?
Building 36, yeah. That's where it was. 36 and 38 are together.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was in building 36. I started working on that internal grinder with the factory man from Worcester, Massachusetts. And the grinder wasn't working right, and we had to practically tear it down to the floor and rebuild it. Him and I did it to get it so it worked right.
And what were you grinding out? What were you reaming out?
The receiver, what they call the receiver body on the 20 millimeter gun. And I was grinding the barrel hole where screw the barrel into the receiver body, where the shells would go into the receiver body, and then the firing pin would hit the shell and it'd go out the barrel. But that's what I was working on. And as soon as U.S. ended the war, Arnold Hanson went down into the 75 millimeter cannon department, and I went with him. And he made me a foreman down there.
Now that was, what, 1945?
1941.
1941. Oh, as soon as the war began.
Yeah, as soon as the war began. 1941.
And that was what building then?
That was in building 36.
Building 36.
Yeah, because 36 ran east and west, and then turned and went north and south. It was an L-shaped building. And I worked there until the war ended. And when the war ended, I went over to the engine plant and went to work as foreman on the camshaft department.
Oh.
With Fred Webb. I don't know, you know Fred Webb or not?
No, didn't know Fred.
Well, Fred Webb and I was foreman in the camshaft department. He had one half of it, and I had the other half.
And that building was?
28.
28.
Let's
see. Who else did you work with there in the camshaft department?
Oh boy.
I mean, like a superintendent or general foreman or...
Roy Fischel was superintendent.
Oh, yes, I knew of him.
Remember Roy Fischel? He was superintendent. And I'm trying to think of the one who was the assistant superintendent, and I just can't think of his name.
Did they have offices in the plant then? Where were the offices during the war? Like for the guns?
For the guns? Well, Arnold Hanson had his office. He was superintendent of the tube department, and his office was in building 56, right across the alley from building 36.
Oh, yes.
In fact, that's where the rough tube started, and then they came over to building 36 to be finished.
Were you ever in this underground firing range?
No. I heard a lot about it, though. But I never was in there.
That no longer exists, I
Oh,
understand.
no, they filled that in. I imagine a lot of the concrete is still there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. In fact, building 36, where we worked on the big guns, we had big machinery, heavy machinery, and they had to make some real heavy concrete foundations for them. And so when the war ended, why, they just moved everything out of there and started putting automobile machinery in there.
Now, was that new automobile machinery,
No.
or some they left over?
Some left over that had been stored, and they brought it back in.
I see.
But then later on, we started replacing the old machinery with new machinery, and they had to put them in, set them in there, and they were gonna dig out some new foundations. And I said, when you start digging, you're gonna hit something that you don't expect. They had no prints on it or anything, but they had some of those big, heavy concrete foundations that we had for those big machines, and some of them were 10 foot thick.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Gee. Well, where did most of the machinery to make the guns come from? Do you remember the supplier?
Oh, we had a lot of suppliers. We had, in fact, a lot of it was made up on the East Coast in Massachusetts. All of the grinders, Heald grinders and then Cincinnati milling machines and Cincinnati grinders from Cincinnati, Ohio.
They had broaching machines too.
Broaching
didn't they?
machines, yeah. Grinders, broaches, lathes. They came from all over the country, but mostly from the East Coast. That's
I
where
see.
most of the machine manufacturers are, or were at that time. Of course, they're scattered now, pretty much.
It seemed that the machinery came in pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Of course, you know, they were just throwing it together, and we had to do a lot of rebuilding on it. In fact, on the big gun machines they brought in, we had to rebuild a lot of those grinders because they just put them together and hoped that they would work. But they weren't doing the job, so we just had to work on them and get them so they would do the job. In fact, we started making the 75 millimeter tank cannon. That's what we started out on. And then we started making a 75 millimeter airplane cannon for the airplanes to put in the B-25 bomber. Then a little later on, we started making a 76 millimeter cannon for tanks, and they were holding some ships in New York Harbor, waiting for the guns that we were making so they could send them to Africa. Boy, they were after us, and we worked all kinds of hours. In fact, Ruth remembers that. I didn't hardly have a home, did I, Ruth?
Not really.
Worked. Well, when it first started, I worked 110 days without a day off. And my shortest day was 14 hours.
Oh, I don't know how you held up under.
Well, you're younger then. I couldn't do it now.
No. Well, then, too, everybody was fired up with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fervor of
Yeah.
saving America. And, well, because I think some people even
Yeah.
then had the fear that the war could come over across.
Orley Mitchell was general foreman, my general foreman then.
What was his first name?
Orley.
Orley Mitchell.
You remember him?
General foreman. I heard the name. I do know him.
Fred Webb was on the other shift as general foreman. Russ Webb was the foreman down the line from me, and Bert Kassler was the foreman. You remember Bert Kassler?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he was the foreman next to me. But most of those fellows are gone now.
Yes.
I know Bert's gone, and Russ is gone, Orley's gone.
Was Orley drowned?
Yeah, Orley drowned.
Oh.
He drowned in Bill's Lake up north of Lansing
Well,
one Sunday. Fell on the boat and drowned.
oh, man. It's too bad.
Yeah, it was.
Well, after the war then, where did you move to?
Over to the engine plant.
The engine plant?
We went on camshafts.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And I was on camshafts for a while, and then they reduced the supervisory positions, and I had to go back to hourly rate. But I was only on hourly rate for about 2 months, and I went down into the cylinder block department and became foreman in the cylinder block department.
Now, was that in Building 28 too?
Mm-hmm. In Building 28.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it started in Building 33 and ended up in Building 28.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked on that. Oh. Up until they started, I'm just trying to think. I worked on the block line for, can't remember. Then they had a reduction, and they transferred me over to labor relations. I went over to labor relations and worked.
What did you do in labor relations?
Whatever they had for me to do.
That's when we were on Ray Street.
Yeah, we were on Ray Street that time. I worked whatever they had, interviewed people and sat in on meetings, and sometimes I'd go out in the employment office and help them out. with Orly Bender. You remember Orrin Bender?
Mhm.
I'd go out there and work with them and help them out.
Did you handle grievances?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What kind of grievances would come up?
Oh, all kinds. Mostly disciplinary grievances. That was the biggest thing, disciplinary.
Like somebody late for work or
Mhm.
absenteeism? Or...
Yeah, or doing something wrong, yeah. Then after I worked in labor relations for a while, I went over to the engine plant as the general foreman in on engine assembly and part of the machine floor and engine assembly.
Bob Charlin was in labor relations on the other two, wasn't he?
Yeah, later on. I went back over to labor relations later on for a while. When they had another reduction, I think we cut down to one shift, and I went over to labor relations and worked for a while again. Bob Charlin was over there then. You know Robert
yes,
Charlin?
Yes.
Okay. He was there then. Then came back to the engine plant, and about that time, I'm trying to know that the second time I went to labor relations was after the Korean War.
In the early 50s?
Yeah, but in the early 50s, I left the engine plant and went over to the Building 28 on the 3.5 rocket job with Elmer Corbin. Remember Elmer Corbin?
Yes.
Okay. He was the superintendent then, and I was the general foreman on the machine floor in 3.5 rocket. And Bob Bryanton was a foreman worker with me. Winston Shepard was a general foreman working over on the press part of the rocket shell. You know all those fellas?
I know of the names of Shepard.
Yeah.
What were the working conditions in the plant during the war?
What were the working conditions?
Yes, I mean, of course, you worked so many hours, but you had good conditions to
Oh,
work
yes,
under,
we
the
had
best
good. The
equipment.
plant was good and clean, and we had real good working conditions. Real good working conditions.
And then even later after the war, that carried over too.
Yeah, yeah. Things became a lot. Before World War II, down in the engine plant was terrible.
What do you mean by that?
Well, dirt, dust. They didn't have the ventilating system that they have nowadays. Cast iron dust. And even after the war, they didn't have the ventilating system. I used to wear white shirts to work, and they weren't white too long. Whether white shirts when I worked in the engine, they turned yellow.
Oh, your undershirts and...
Oh, yes.
From rust. From rust. The cast iron dust.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
it must have gotten into their body because the perspiration on his clothes is what made them, I guess.
But now you'd never know. You go into one of those, well, when I left there, the plant was just as nice. You could go down through there, you wouldn't see a bit of dust or anything. The ventilating systems were really good.
Good. The lighting was good too.
Yeah, the lighting was real good.
Well, safety practices have come along up through the years too.
Oh,
haven't
sure,
they?
sure. Yeah. But, I'll tell you, it was a good place to work. I wasn't in one place very long. I mean, I moved to a variety of jobs. I had a lot of jobs.
What are some of the jobs?
What were
I know we got up to the camshaft.
Then from camshafts I went to blocks, and then I went to engine assembly for a while. And then I was the general foreman over in engine assembly on the other side. And I went over, transferred to labor relations for a while, then came back over to the engine plant.
Who was the director of personnel when you were in labor relations?
Bill Mahoney. Bill Mahoney.
What kind of a man to work with?
Bill's a very nice fella. Very nice fella. Very nice to work with. Very understanding. And Francis Anderson was Director of Labor Relations. Remember him?
Oh, yes.
Andy Anderson.
Now, did you
And
report?
Harold Cutler was there too.
Oh, yes.
Remember Harold Cutler?
Yes. Did you report directly to Anderson?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Oh, we.
And Gail Retzloff, remember Gail Retzloff? He was there
Yes.
also. Ray
Matt-
Brown,
Ray Brown, Matt Campbell.
yeah.
Of course, you mentioned Bender. There's another one, Red Cherry.
Red Cherry. He was in employment when I first went over there. Red
I
Cherry was.
see. Mm-hmm.
And Bender worked for Red Cherry.
Oh. Did you enjoy your job in labor relations?
I would have liked to stay there.
Uh-huh.
But you go where they want you to go. And I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Well, you had 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Then we went back to the engine plant, and I worked for, I'm trying to think of his name. Can't do it. But anyway, Arnold Hansen became superintendent in the engine plant, and I was assistant for him in the engine plant.
Now, what years were that?
Well, I became assistant in 1958.
Hmm?
And then he moved to the, well, during the Korean War, he was over in aircraft guns for a while. Then he came to the engine plant as superintendent. And then he became general superintendent at that time. A little later on, he became general superintendent, and I'm trying to think who they brought in. Charles Armitage, I think they brought in at that time. After Arnold Hansen, I think Charles Armitage brought him
I will be interviewing
in.
him later
I didn't
on.
know he was in Florida.
Hmm?
Does he live in Sarasota, or does he live out in?
It's on kind of that point that runs out below Sarasota.
Oh,
It's Sarasota address, but there's on the map there's kind of a point here, and you cross a bridge and go out on that
Mhm.
point of land.
mm.
Oh, who was general manager then when you were in the well, after the war? Then it must have been Mr. Wolfer,
No, there was
wasn't he?
one.
There was a Skinner was during the war.
And Skinner was right after the war too, and
Yes.
Burnham was his.
Don Burnham was
Don Burnham was the
production
manufacturing manager.
Manufacturing manager.
Right, right.
I see. Who was production manager then?
Well, I think that's manufacturing manager,
Same-
production, same one.
I
Yeah,
see.
Same thing.
Hmm?
Yeah, with Don Burnham.
Did you work with Bob Cook?
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
What kind of a man was he to work with?
Very nice fellow. Very nice fellow. In fact, Bob Cook and I spent a little time in the hospital together waiting for our babies to be born.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Our youngest daughter was born the same day that his first child was born up in Sparrow Hospital. We were in the waiting room together.
Ah.
That's when Bob was, I think he just got out of GM Tech, and well, maybe he'd been out for a while. He was foreman on inspection over at Final Assembly at that time.
About what year would that have been?
46.
46.
Mm-hmm. I understand Bob just lost his wife here a short while ago.
Yes, she had cancer.
She's had a rough time of it over the years. She had an operation on her head for a tumor.
Oh, I didn't know
A few
that.
years, didn't you know that?
No.
Few years ago, she had an operation on her head for a tumor.
I knew this last year she'd been ill with
Mhm.
cancer and undergone some chemotherapy treatments.
Yeah.
But they're not always successful.
No, not really.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, he has a dealership down here, doesn't he?
Down by Venice someplace.
By the, Fort Myers, Venice area.
Mm-hmm. Probably lives down here all the time now.
He still keeps his Sheboygan address.
Does he? Huh?
So,
Yeah, I heard he bought a dealership down there.
Well then, did you know Don Burnham?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I knew
What
him
kind
very
of a man was he to work with?
Don was a nice fellow also. All of those fellows were real nice. Don ended up over in Westinghouse as president of Westinghouse.
Oh, is
Didn't you
that
know that?
right? No.
Oh yeah,
I
Don
didn't
Burnham
know that.
became president of Westinghouse.
Oh my, he's really going
And
up.
after he left Oldsmobile.
Was Phil Monahan there when you were there?
Bill Monahan? Mm-hmm.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Did you work with him?
No, I didn't work with him.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know too much about Phil.
And Mr. Wolfram,
Yeah.
did he ever come out in the plant and look
Very
around?
seldom. Very seldom. We'd hear about it though because where he lived, when I was general foreman over in the engine plant on the assembly line, I used to hear a lot about oil leaks. And it came right from Wolfram because he had his garage floor painted, and if he got a spot of oil on his garage floor, we heard about it. And we spent a lot of money trying to correct oil leaks. We finally licked it so that we didn't get oil leaks in the cars.
Well, I thought I read about 90% of the cars on the highway, you have a little leak a little oil.
Yeah, they do, but
It's,
they can be corrected.
Mhm.
They can be corrected.
how would you go about correcting that?
Take it back to the dealership and tell them
Yeah.
you want that oil leak fixed.
Ours don't leak.
I told him, I took mine back to the dealership 2 or 3 times to have it fixed.
Because you don't want a spot of oil on your garage floor.
Well, I don't have a garage, I have a carport, but I have a painted garage floor, or painted floor,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't want any oil on it.
Mhm.
I don't like oil leaks.
No,
Uh,
it probably shouldn't be leaks.
Well, you'd be surprised how much oil is wasted in this country every day because of oil leaks in cars. It would amaze you if you knew how many
Okay.
gallons of oil is lost. Just plain lost.
The bad seals? you
Bad
think?
seals, poor installation.
Mhm. Do you remember any special problems in the plant when you were working there, Carey, that they had different types of fixes on, or how they worked that out?
Well, yeah, you're always having problems
Mhm.
of some kind or another, but you have an engineering, you have a methods engineering, and you have a machining engineering department, and you call those fellas down, and between the two of you, you correct the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're buying a new type machine, what you get in on the original design on it. You go down to the factory where they're going to try it out. I know I went to several factories where they're trying out new machinery. I remember one time we flew to Hagerstown, Maryland, to a company, Landis Grinder Company. We're making machines for grinding pistons. We went down there and watched them run off the new machines.
Then did we buy those
Oh yeah,
Landis grinders?
yeah, we bought them.
Mhm.
In fact, I think they're still using them over in the engine plant. I think they're still using them.
But no specific problems with the machinery that come to your mind right
No,
now that you
no.
have to work around or
No.
had to adjust?
Well, you're always adjusting
Mhm.
machinery, and you're changing tools. And if you have a breakdown, well, you get the repairman there to fix it, and pace the floor till he gets it fixed, because it's holding everything up.
Of course, they never used to shut the line down, did they?
No.
Hardly.
I remember when I first went into the engine plant, it was a crime to shut the assembly line down. I mean, it would really give you the business if you shut the line down. And that was before Bob Cook became general superintendent. After he became general superintendent, he says, if you have a problem, if it's a quality problem or a safety problem, you shut the line down. So that relieved a lot of tension at that time. Because it was a crime to shut that line down.
It's pretty costly, too,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. I remember one time when Arnold Hanson was superintendent, and I was general foreman down there, and we had a breakdown on on the conveyor line that brought the piston assemblies over to the main assembly line. And there was a breakdown. And of course, a bunch of them were overhead and hung up, and he come down there and he says, "What can I do to help?" And I said, "Just get out of the way. That's a big help. Just get out of our way." So he backed up against the wall, and of course we had it all set up and running. We never missed a beat, but we carried a lot of them by hand until they got it fixed.
Yes.
There's problems, but you overcome them.
Mm-hmm. But a group of men working together have a camaraderie there.
Yeah.
You're all working for the same
Yeah.
goal, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
Bob Rollis, did you work with him?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a person was he to work with?
Boy, none better.
None
better. Bob Ross, Bob Cook, Don Burnham, those fellows were all real nice fellows.
Did you know Tom Downey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he used to come over in the shell plant when I was over in the shell plant. He'd come in the plant unannounced at night. And it might be 11 o'clock at night when he came in. And he'd just walk around and look things over, ask you how things are going, and then away he'd go again. You never know when he was coming in.
Not many of the staff heads did that in the
No.
manufacturing or production.
No. But he would. He'd come in and just look things over. Burnham would come over during the day, but never at night.
Now, Mr. Skinner, would he ever come in the plant? Do you remember him coming in?
Yeah, he would come in the plant. In fact, he would come in at night once in a while. I remember one time he came in and he was walking through the axle plant. Now, I didn't see this, but the foreman told me about it. He was walking through the axle plant without his safety glasses on. And one of the hourly people stopped him and says that if you're going to be in the plant, you better put your safety glasses on if you have any. He thanked the fella and pulled the safety glasses out of his pocket and put them on.
He probably had just slipped his mind, perhaps.
Well, he could have, or just maybe did it on purpose.
That's true, too. But he was something.
Yeah, but the foreman said he was very nice about it. He thanked the fella and took the glasses out of his pocket and put them on.
That's sort of an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I thought so. But the 40 years that I worked there, I really enjoyed the 40 years I worked there. Because I had a variety of jobs, doing various things. I was tied down to one job for a long period of time. The last job as assistant superintendent, for 15 years I was on that job. But that I moved from one area to another several times, back and forth.
And you ended up in the
Engine plant.
engine plant.
Actually, the engine parts plant. They call it the engine parts plant in building 28.
Engine parts
Yeah,
plant.
and we made the cylinder block for both the 350 and the 455. And we made the pistons, the camshafts. We had the heat treat down there. We made the connecting rods. We had the small parts like rocker arms and piston pins and manifolds.
What is heat treat?
Heat treat, that's where we get the raw material in that is soft and hard, and then we harden them or temper them. They call it tempering. We buy bolts from the bolt companies, and then we harden them to our specifications. We buy piston pins, and then we harden those piston pins, and then we grind them down to fit the pistons.
How would you harden them?
Go through a furnace. They go through a furnace at a certain temperature, and of course each batch of steel has a different temperature, and then we drop them into quenching oil and draw them out to a certain temperature.
And then they're machined down to our
Generally the bolts are done at that time.
I see.
generally the bolts are done.
Mhm. But the other parts would have to be machined down to the
Yeah.
tolerances.
See, on a heat treat, you run them through a high temperature heat. Then you drop them in oil to quench them. Then you run them through another furnace to draw them back to the temperature you want so that they're not too hard. Because if they're too hard, they're brittle and they'll break.
Oh,
It
yeah.
becomes a safety factor. And we run into that from bolts that we bought one time in the engine plant for connecting rod bolts. We were buying bolts from several companies, but this one company forgot to draw back a bunch of them. In other words, they hardened them and quenched them, but they forgot to put them through the draw to draw them back so that they weren't brittle. And we got them in engines, and we rev the engines up and break the bolts. And we ruined a lot of engines.
Oh, well, yeah.
We got engines clear out to California that way before we caught it. They didn't break in our plant, but they broke out there. But then we knew what numbers there were on the engine, so we got them all back.
That's
And
quite
had
a
to
cost.
oh yeah, there were something like 1,500 engines that we had to call back.
Well, then in that case, does the supplier, is he liable for
Yes.
this?
He had to pay for every bit of repair that we did on them. Every engine we lost, he had to pay for.
That's why quality is so important.
Yeah, quality is very important. And somebody just didn't do their job.
Did you ever work in the quality control area at all?
No, but I worked with quality control a lot. In fact, you had to work with quality control. In manufacturing, you work with quality control all the time.
Do you remember any unusual incidents in the plant? Like fires or?
Oh yeah, in the engine plant, in the engine plant, we used to test with gasoline. Used to test all of the engines with gasoline, and invariably every noon hour we'd have a fire in the stacks, in the vent stacks. And then we'd have to, plant protection would come over and we'd start flooding the stacks with water to put the fires up. Invariably every noon hour, for some reason or other, we'd have a fire. But eventually we changed that so we started testing with natural gas. Changed everything over, but when we were testing with gasoline.
Wonder why it happened at noon.
I don't know. We never could figure out why it would happen at noon. Invariably, of course, we always left engines running at noon.
Yeah.
And while we were at lunch, but somebody was always there watching them. But for some reason or other, a stack would catch on fire. We never knew why.
Well, then the natural gas, do they still test engines with natural gas?
No, they're testing with air now.
Oh, with air.
Compressed
I
air.
see.
They test compressed air now.
Oh,
In fact, they were when I left there, testing with compressed air.
I see. Well, did you get into the plastics molding and
That
all?
was just starting when I left.
Mhm.
Things have changed a great deal since I left.
Oh, yes, yes.
They were just getting into plastics. Remember the diesel engine? They were
Yeah.
just starting that when I left too.
Oh, yes, Plant 5.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, they started making
Oh.
them in Building 28.
Oh,
Sure, they started making parts for the diesel engine in Building 28, and the cylinder block and the cylinder heads, the pistons, and then assembling them on the assembly line in Building 36. Yeah, they built the diesel engine.
when was that?
Well, that was in the energy crunch in 1974.
Mhm.
I know just before I left, we had engineering brought over some parts for us to machine out for them, for this diesel engine. I think it was the biggest mistake that Oldsmobile ever made, or General Motors. It was a General Motors decision, really.
Mhm.
But I think it was the biggest mistake they ever made. It cost a lot of money to repair all those cars.
Oh, yes.
They didn't work out. And then they built the new plant out, Plant 5,
Delta?
out in Delta.
Mhm.
Built that plant to build a diesel engine. I think it's 6-cylinder diesel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That didn't work out.
No.
Now they make the quad floor out there.
That seems to be
That
pretty
is a
good
real engine. I've talked to several people that have those, and they say that's a real engine.
Say, I've heard somebody term it the engine of the future too.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it is or not.
In fact, we were down to Topeka, Kansas last year, and we went to a shopping center, and when I got out of the car, there was another lady pulled in with a Cutlass Calais, and it had a quad 4 in, and I said, "How you like the quad 4?" She says they love it.
Oh.
She says it's the best car we ever had.
Well, that's good advertising.
Yeah,
When your
yeah.
customer tells you that.
Yeah.
Well, Carey, I'm not as familiar with your experience as I am some people I've
Mhm.
interviewed, but I'm open to listen to anything that you want to tell us.
Well, I think I covered quite a lot of it from the time I hired in until I retired.
Did you plan to retire when you did, or did you just elect to take early?
No, I planned to retire.
Mhm.
It was right after that, then they gave him the choice, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was right after that when the energy crunch come on, and then they gave him a choice to retire or, and they gave him a pretty good deal on retiring. I retired in March the 1st. The 28th of February was the last day of my working day
74.
in '74, but I think it came up in June or July that they gave him a choice of retiring early
Mhm.
at age 55 or something like that, and giving them a pretty good deal on it.
A lot of people took advantage
Yeah.
of that.
But that was a little bit early to retire, I think, anyway.
Mhm.
I had 40 years in when I left. 40 years and 1 month.
It was before Christmas of that year that you decided definitely you were gonna, set
Yeah.
the date you were gonna retire. When was it you turned it in to tell them you were retiring?
No, it was just before Christmas.
So,
And the last day I worked was the 23rd day of January. Then I had 5 weeks vacation coming.
Mhm.
They gave me 5 weeks vacation after that.
Good. And you're enjoying your retirement now.
Oh, yeah. You bet. We find plenty to do, don't we, Ruth? We wonder.
well, they called him when they were sending him to Mexico, you know, but I said, no way.
Yeah,
You
they called
remember
me up
that?
and wanted me to go to Mexico to the plant that they were starting down there.
Oh,
They wanted me to
yes.
go down there and work. And that was a pretty good deal down there. You know, they would pay me a pretty good salary every month, and I could still draw my retirement pay
Mhm.
and get my expenses paid besides.
You've been retired how long before? That was over the lake when they called. You must have been retired 3 or 4 years.
I think about 4 years they called me up.
Don't you remember when they started that plant out in Mexico?
Yes, I do, and I was trying to think of the date myself, but it doesn't
Can't
come.
think of it, but I know we were up at our cottage up at the lake, because
Mhm.
we were coming back and forth.
Yeah, it must have been in 1977, I believe.
7?
I think so, yeah.
Well, what would you have been doing down there if you had
Help them
accepted-
set up the engine plant.
helped them set up?
Mm-hmm. Help them set up the engine plant.
Well, that's a nice compliment to your experience and skill.
Well, I thought so too, but I just didn't want to go down there, really.
Mm-hmm.
After I retired, I went up and taught a supervisory class at the Lansing Community College
Oh,
for 1 winter.
on engines or just?
No, just a supervisory.
Just how to supervise people, you
Mhm,
mean?
yeah.
Oh,
I had 40 students.
very nice.
What was his name, the one that went to Mexico, Gene? that died?
So I can't tell you. After you've been away from the people for a while, you can't remember their names. I know you find that, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't his first name Gene?
Yeah, his first name was Gene.
And sometimes you know a name, but it doesn't come. It's
Yeah.
there in the back of your mind, and then when you least need it, all of a sudden
Yeah,
it comes.
yeah, when you least need it, why it'll come to you, yeah,
Mhm.
that's right.
He died a few years after that, cancer.
Yeah, after he came back from Mexico, he took sick with cancer.
How long would you have been, your stint would have been in Mexico if you'd accepted that?
They wanted
proposal?
me to go down for 6 months,
I see.
but some of them went down and stayed a year. What they wanted to do, to help set up the plant, but mostly to train the Mexican people to run it. That's what they really
It's
wanted.
quite a responsibility.
Yeah, to train the Mexican people to run it.
Would there have been a language barrier, or how would?
No, I don't think so. I think they were English-speaking people, but they knew nothing about manufacturing. You had to teach them everything, which would have been, I think, a chore.
Did you enjoy your teaching at the LCC?
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but I had 1 year of it, and that was enough. There's too many other things to do.
Yes.
I did it in the winter time, really, when you couldn't do anything else.
I
So I had
know.
to shovel snow.
Now you don't have to do that.
No, we find other things to do.
Do you come back to Michigan in the winter, or in the
Summertime.
summer?
We didn't last year, and we
went
did the year
in
before.
September we went back.
We went back in September. We flew back for a week.
Just to see my sister and our son and his brother.
I have a brother that lives in Chelsea,
Oh, yes.
and and then our son used to live in Grand Rapids, but he now lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then she has a sister that lives in Dimondale.
Is your son a GM man?
No, no, he went to college in Grand Rapids, but after 2 years he quit. Got married.
What was he majoring in?
Boy, I don't know. Do you know, Ruth?
I know what he wanted to start out, and then he decided to get married and gave it up.
Started out in engineering.
Electrical engineering was what he was going to do.
Yeah.
Electrical engineer.
But he got married. Then he worked for Dale Baker in Grand Rapids, selling cars.
Oh.
He started selling cars in Lansing, and then he got the job with Dale Baker in Grand Rapids selling Oldsmobiles. And he worked himself up to manager of the used car department there. Used car sales, and he had quite a few salesmen working for him. But then Dale Baker sold out to some other people, and he didn't get along with it too well, so he had a chance to go to Minneapolis, Minnesota as the sales manager in a Honda dealership. So that's where he's at now.
Does he like that?
In fact, I just talked to him yesterday, or today I talked to him. And he gets every Wednesday off. Man, every Wednesday he gets off. And once a month he gets a 3-day weekend. But he has to work 2 nights a week.
But if he likes it...
And he has to work on Saturday. But he gets a long weekend once a month. So.
Does he like Minneapolis?
Well, he says people up there don't know how to drive in the wintertime.
You'd think they would, because they have about as
He
bad
says
weather
they're a
as
bunch
we
of
do.
dopes. They don't know how to drive cars in the wintertime. He says they slip and slide all over the place.
That's the way they do in the first little ice in Michigan, too.
Yeah. And then Mac McEwen was the foreman over there. And, Russian Charlie was the group leader over there. But when Fred got pneumonia and they had to go to the hospital, they had to have somebody fill in his job for him on the assembly line. So they got me over there. And here I am, little fellow, weigh about 120 pounds, pick up this big picture and put it on the brake and set the brakes. And I just got 3 days, I got so I could do it pretty good and, walk back to the next one. And Mac come along, he says, "Wow, you're doing that job pretty good now, so you can help the fellow put washers on bolts." I never will forget that. Mac McEwen, I don't know if you know Mac McEwen.
No, I didn't know him.
That was really good. But then, you know, that's when I became acquainted with Fred LaPratt.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we played ball together. We were on the diamond ball team, and we were the champions of Oldsmobile at one time in the diamond ball team.
Well, Olds used to have quite an active
Oh yeah,
group of teams,
Uh-huh.
didn't they?
yeah.
Now, what teams did they play? Just themselves?
Well, our plant was just an interplant team, but they had a team that played various cities.
Mm,
Remember Archie Tarpoff?
yes.
Okay, Archie Tarpoff was the pitcher for the Oldsmobile team, and he was a good pitcher. I don't know whether he's still living or not.
Oh, yes.
Is he
has
still
a-
running the restaurant?
No, he has a catering service.
Oh, yeah.
A catering business.
Yeah.
Now, this was a softball team,
Mm-hmm. Softball team.
and he was the pitcher.
He was the pitcher, and he was a good one.
What part did you play? What?
Well, I didn't play on that team. We just played the interplant team.
I see.
But he played on the team that went to various
Oh.
towns to play, and played in state championships.
Oh.
Yeah, they were really good.
Now, what year?
Red Cherry was on that team too. Remember?
Yes.
Yeah,
Royal Cherry.
yeah. Royal Cherry was on that team.
What place did he play in the team? Do you
Royal?
remember?
I don't remember.
What year about was this?
34, 35.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Did
That's
those
what they
teams sort of peter out after the war, or what?
Well,
happened to 'em?
yeah. Before the war, they kind of petered out. Yeah.
I see.
Well, Oldsmobile quit sponsoring the one team. You know, they sponsored the uniforms and paid their expenses and everything to travel. But they quit that, so the team just folded up.
Well, so they really didn't have a baseball team. It was always a softball.
Always a softball team, yeah.
I see.
Always a softball team.
But didn't Mr. Mahoney used to play on the softball team?
He used to be an umpire on a
Ah.
hardball. He used to be an umpire on hardball.
Hmm.
He used to go down to Sycamore Park and be an umpire. And that was when Bill was working in the time department at the time.
What time would that be? 34?
Yeah, 34, 35, yeah.
He was a time clerk.
And he never told you he was an umpire, did he?
No, no.
Yeah, he didn't.
No.
Yeah, he
didn't
was an
tell us
umpire,
that.
yeah.
Hmm.
He should have told you that.
I'm just trying to think. I don't think he did, though.
No.
Of course, we were kind of catching his experience
Yeah.
with the Olds, but that's an interesting
Mhm.
little aside to
Yeah.
know that. Well, are you active in any, like golf or bowling or
No,
sports here?
I'm active in
Shuffleboard.
Shuffleboard.
He's
In fact,
shuffleboard director.
I'm the director of shuffleboard here. In fact, when we moved in the park here 2 years ago, last December, they had nothing going on shuffleboard.
Mm-hmm.
So they called me